I always thought my marriage to Marie was solid. Sure, after 10 years of marriage, the passion wasn't the same, but we still laughed, shared stories over dinner, and made plans for the future. We rarely argued, and even when we did, we made up quickly. We had something more than just love, partnership, trust, respect. At least, that's what I thought. But one day, something changed. I didn't know what it was then, but I could feel it in my bones. There was a tension in the air that couldn't be explained. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when it all went wrong, but looking back, I realized it all started the day Marie accidentally met him. Alex, her first love. At first, the changes were subtle. She started staying at work a little longer, but I didn't pay any attention to it. It happens. Then new details appeared. She started to spend more time on her phone, answering messages with a slight smile, and then quickly locking the screen or even deleting chats. It seemed strange to me, but I brushed it off. I trusted her. Marie and I had always been open with each other. She would tell me about her colleagues, about problems at work, about her friends. But suddenly there were more pauses in her stories, more understatement. Once I asked her why she was on the phone so often, and she answered without thinking. The girls in the group, just right, discuss all sorts of nonsense. I nodded, accepting the answer, but the feeling of anxiety did not go away. It settled inside, like a small splinter that reminded me of itself from time to time. We used to have our own traditions. In the evenings, we liked to settle down on the couch, watch TV series, order pizza, or just chat about the past day. Now everything has changed. She often went to another room, supposedly to work or just rest alone. Sometimes she even fell asleep before me, which almost never happened before. When I lay down next to her, there was emptiness between us, cold, dull, oppressive. I remember one particular evening. It was late, the rain was pounding the windows, and I, out of habit, made 2 teas, as we always did. I called her, but she said she didn't want any. I went to the bedroom door and saw her lying on the bed, her face buried in her phone. Her fingers were quickly sliding across the screen, and there was a slight smile on her face, one I hadn't seen for a long time. It was some kind of special expression, as if at that moment she was in another world, in another reality, inaccessible to me. That's when I realized that something had changed, something important, something that I hadn't been told about. A few days later, another event happened that strengthened my suspicions. I saw her choosing a new dress. It seemed nothing out of the ordinary, but I knew her taste, her style. It wasn't hers. Too revealing, too elegant for everyday wear. I asked, "Where are you going in that?" She smiled, but a shadow of embarrassment flashed in her eyes. "I just wanted to update my wardrobe." "Is that bad?" I nodded again, but at that moment something inside me trembled. It wasn't just a new dress. It was a signal. The following weeks passed in some strange tension. I began to pay closer attention to details. How she began to take better care of herself. How she looked in the mirror more often, fixed her hair, chose perfume with special care. It seemed like nothing special, but I knew her. I knew when she did it for herself, and when she did it for someone else. One night I woke up and noticed that she was not around. I went into the living room and saw the faint glow of her phone screen. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, typing a message. I didn't say anything. I just watched. After a few minutes, she sighed, turned off the screen, and quietly went back to bed. I pretended to be asleep. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to believe that this was just my imagination, that I was wrong, that everything could be explained. But the more I looked for answers, the less I found. The turning point was one incident. We were having dinner at home, and her phone vibrated. She quickly grabbed it, looked at the screen, and immediately turned it over, as if she was afraid that I would see. At that moment, I felt something inside me break. "Who is it?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. She froze for a second, but then smiled. "Just a colleague." Her voice was too light, too casual. I felt everything inside me tighten. I knew she was lying. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I tried to figure out at what point we lost each other. I wanted to remember the last time she looked at me the way she looked at her phone that night. And I couldn't. I wasn't one to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to make a scene or accuse her without evidence. But now I knew. Something was happening. Something that could destroy everything we had built over the years. I didn't know how it would end. But one thing was clear. My life was no longer the same. For a long time, I couldn't admit to myself that I needed proof. Suspicions were eating me up inside. but I couldn't just accuse her without reason. That's why I installed a GPS tracker on her phone. I felt like a traitor, but my gut instinct told me that the truth could be much more painful. One evening, Marie said that she was going to meet a friend. I tried to look calm, even wished her a good time. But as soon as she left, I opened the app. The red mark on the map was moving in the opposite direction from where her friend lived. 10 minutes later, she stopped at one of the restaurants in the city center. The address seemed familiar to me. I entered it into the search engine. The restaurant was cozy, romantic, the kind of place where couples in love go. I made an instant decision. 15 minutes later, I was already parking nearby. My heart was pounding in my chest when I got out of the car and headed to the restaurant window. I didn't have to look for her for long. I saw Marie right away. She was sitting at a table by the window, opposite him. Alex. That one. They were laughing. Her eyes sparkled with some special light, and it was not the look she once looked at me with. I froze. Time seemed to slow down. She leaned towards him, touched his hand, and something inside me snapped. Anger, resentment, pain, everything was mixed up in a lump. I wanted to burst inside, make a scandal, throw all the questions that were tearing me apart from the inside in her face. But I held back. If I have understood anything in these weeks, it is that hasty actions can ruin everything. And I needed her words, her confession. I turned around and left. I sat in the car for a long time, staring into space. I don't remember how I got home. I just mechanically carried out all the actions, and one picture was spinning in my head. Her smile, her look, her hand lying on his hand. When she returned, I was waiting for her in the living room. She looked a little surprised to see me. I looked at her and asked her directly, "How was your meeting with your friend?" She blinked, then looked away. "Good. We were chatting, drinking coffee." "Why aren't you sleeping?" I continued to look at her. Silence hung between us. I saw a shadow of worry flicker in her eyes. I couldn't hold back any longer. "What if I told her that I knew where you really were?" She froze. Her fingers clenched into fists. Her breathing became ragged. She looked at me for a few seconds, then exhaled slowly. There was something in her eyes, remorse, guilt, or just fear of being caught. "You were following me?" she whispered. I chuckled, although everything inside me was burning. "I had to, because you don't tell me the truth anymore." She lowered her head, as if collecting her thoughts. Then she said quietly, "I didn't want to hurt you. It all happened unexpectedly. I met Alex by chance, and he reminded me of who I used to be. I waited for her to say something else, for her to explain, to refuse, to dissuade me, but no. She just looked at me with tear-stained eyes, and I felt something inside me finally crumble. I packed my things in silence. My head was empty, only the ringing echo of Mary's last words. I didn't want to stay in this house a minute longer. I called my friend Max and said I would come. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He just said, "I'm waiting." I got in my car and drove away. But I knew this was not the end. As I sat in Max's living room, staring at the ceiling, a thought occurred to me. Alex had ruined my marriage. He had taken away my wife, my peace of mind, my faith in honesty. And he couldn't just leave without consequences. I was not the kind of person to let my life be ruined and pretend everything was fine. A few calls later, I found the right people. In the world of business and high-level connections, there are always those who are willing to make trouble for someone else for a small favor. Alex worked for a prestigious architectural firm. His career was on the rise. He was on the verge of getting a big contract that could open the way to the elite. I simply adjusted the course of events. Contracts were refused. Unpleasant rumors. Pressure. His reputation was shaken. His partners began to doubt. Alex lost an important project, and this was only the first blow. He had to explain himself to his superiors, look for new opportunities, and most importantly, justify himself to Marie herself. She found out everything. And when she came to me, her face was pale, and her voice was almost pleading. "Stop it," she said. "This has gone too far." I looked at her and smiled. For the first time in a long time, I almost felt cheerful. "What, do you feel sorry for him?" I asked. "The one because of whom you destroyed our marriage?" She looked away. In her eyes, I saw something like fear, or awareness. Maybe at that moment, she realized that her actions had consequences. I did not continue this conversation. I just turned around and left. The next day, I bought a one-way ticket. I left my job, my home, my old life. I needed something new. I didn't know what was ahead, but I knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the best way to win is to leave and never look back. And Marie was left in an empty house. She was probably sitting by the window, holding her phone, hoping for a message. But I didn't write anymore. Having settled in a new city, I decided to devote all my time to myself. I needed to recover, both physically and mentally. Morning jogs in the park became a ritual, then training in the gym, healthy eating. I worked on myself like never before. But even the heaviest loads could not drown out the thoughts that swirled in my head at night. That's when I decided to try therapy. For a long time, I was skeptical about this, but now I understood. I needed to talk to someone. That's how I met Lola. She was younger than me, but at the same time amazingly wise. Her voice was soft, but there was always firmness in her words. She did not pity me, did not try to avoid sharp corners. She just listened, sometimes asking questions that made me think deeper than I expected. At first, these were just sessions, but over time, our communication began to go beyond the office. After one of the meetings, Lola suggested walking to the metro. We walked, talked about everything, not only about my problems, but also about books, about life, about people. I began to look forward to these meetings not only for the sake of therapy, but also for her sake. Gradually, something more appeared between us. It was not immediately noticeable, but it was felt in the looks, in the light touches, in the way the pauses between words sometimes dragged on. We began to spend more time together, and one day everything changed. It was an ordinary day. We were sitting on a bench in the park, discussing something, and suddenly there was silence. I turned to Lola, and she was already looking at me. I don't know who made the first move, but the next moment we kissed. It was unexpected, but at the same time so natural. At that moment, I realized that I had finally begun to truly live anew.